Hello and welcome to the Black Mold Podcast. I'm your host, Moe the Mold Inspector, owner of Mold Safe Solutions and a certified mold inspector serving all of Southern California. Today we're going to talk about mold in the Bible, ancient wisdom for modern times. The Old Testament, particularly the book of Leviticus, talks about mold, mildew, leprosy, and how it relates to the priests back then, Aaron and Moses. I'm sure you heard of Moses. He gave us the 10 Commandments, the laws that we essentially get our legal system today. They were essentially health officials, the chief mold inspectors for their community back in the land of Canaan. And they would go and inspect the houses looking for mold. Sometimes they would order mold remediation. And in severe cases, they would have the houses torn down and then taken outside of the town and thrown in the dump, right? So we see today that mold is a serious issue. Many of the people that are watching this video have been affected by toxic mold in their home, in their businesses, their families. And even back then, 5,000 years ago, whenever the Bible was written, they were dealing with this mold. And of course, if you know anything about mold, it's been here before us. I believe it actually controls the world and some people's minds, as I'll get into in some of my future podcasts, where I'll be talking about mental illness, Alzheimer's, and how all these different mental diseases can be tied to mold and fungal infections. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read directly from the book of Leviticus. Some of you are listening to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, your favorite podcast app. Maybe you're checking out this video on Facebook or YouTube. But whatever the platform, please hit the like button, thumbs up, whatever it may be, subscribe, and stay tuned to these special video podcasts that I'm doing. You can listen via audio or watch them. So I'm going to share my screen. If you're, of course, watching, you could watch along, or if you're listening, you could just listen. And I'm going to read directly from the book of Leviticus 14:33-57 through 57. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as your possession, and I put a spreading mold in a house in that land, the owner of the house must go and tell the priest, 'I have seen something that looks like a defiling mold in my house.' The priest is to order the house to be emptied before he goes in to examine the mold, so that nothing in the house will be pronounced unclean. After this, the priest is to go in and inspect the house. He is to examine the mold on the walls, and if it has greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deeper than the surface of the wall, the priest shall go out the doorway of the house and close it up for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest shall return to inspect the house. If the mold has spread on the walls, he is to order that the contaminated stones be torn out and thrown into the unclean place outside the town. He must have all the inside walls of the house scraped, and the material that is scraped off dumped into an unclean place outside the town. Then they are to take the other stones to replace these and take new clay and plaster the house. If the defiling mold reappears in the house after the stones have been torn out and the house scraped and plastered, the priest is to go and examine it. And if the mold has spread in the house, it is a persistent defiling mold. The house is unclean. It must be torn down, its stones, timbers, and all the plaster, and taken out of town to an unclean place. Anyone who goes into the house while it is closed up will be unclean till evening. Anyone who sleeps or eats in the house must wash their clothes. But if the priest comes to examine it and the mold has not spread after the house has been plastered, he shall pronounce the house clean, because the defiling mold is gone. To purify the house, he is to take 2 birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds over fresh water in a clay pot. Then he is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them into the blood of the dead bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall purify the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Then he is to release the live bird in the open fields outside of town. In this way, he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. These are the regulations for any defiling skin disease, for a sore, for defiling molds in a fabric or in a house, and for a swelling or a rash or a shiny spot to determine when something is clean or unclean. These are the regulations for defiling skin diseases and defiling molds. So I'm going to go into that in the next podcast, where we're going to talk about how fungal infections, fungal diseases played a big part in the Bible. All right. So I wanted to share some of the modern parallels of what's going on now. So while Leviticus provides the most detailed account of mold remediation and mold inspections, it is mentioned in other parts of the Bible as well. It's often mentioned alongside other plagues and blights, and it appears in several books of the Old Testament. For example, in Deuteronomy 28:22 and in Kings 8:37, mildew is listed among the curses for disobedience and as an affliction that God's people might face. It's worth noting that the term mildew in these biblical passages is often used interchangeably with mold in modern translations. The original Hebrew word, tassarat, I believe that's how you pronounce it, is sometimes translated as leprosy, but is understood to encompass various types of fungal growths. These references further underscore the recognition of mold and fungal infections as a significant problem in ancient times. So it's, again, interesting to note that, Aaron and Moses were essentially priests. They were mediators between God and the people, but they were mold inspectors, and they were talking to the Lord, who gave them these instructions. And of course, Moses had the laws, right? The 10 Commandments. It's interesting to note many of the biblical ancient procedures they had to deal with mold parallels to today, how we do modern mold inspections and mold remediation. Many aspects of the biblical approach to mold align with the current best practices. The Bible emphasizes the importance of identifying, inspecting for mold, just as we modern experts do. The role of the priest was essentially the role of the mold inspector today. The practice of closing up the house is similar to modern containment procedures used during mold remediation. The biblical instruction to remove contaminated materials aligns with current remediation techniques. The Bible prescribes multiple inspections, which is also a key component to modern mold remediation processes. For example, you're going to want to get a mold inspection normally before you do mold remediation, so you could see the extent of the damage, what types of molds are in the house. You could have that process, of course, monitored by a third party during the mold remediation process. And then when it's all said and done, you could get what's called a final mold clearance, a final mold test, to make sure that that mold company who removed the mold did it correctly and there's no more mold in your house. So we see a lot of different parallels between the ancient times in the Bible and today. The biblical instructions for dealing with mold given to Moses and Aaron, they demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the dangers of mold. And, the people listening to this podcast or watching this video, most of you have been affected by mold. We often learn the hard way. Either we get sick or our loved ones get sick. And then we start learning about mold and what we could do to protect ourselves, to inspect our house, to remove it. And of course, any homes in the future, people that have been affected by mold, we always want to make sure that there's no water damage and mold. So often we're getting mold inspections and we're looking for it often once we've been affected. These ancient guidelines remind us of the challenge of maintaining healthy living environments, and it's not new. They also illustrate how practical health measures were often intertwined with religious and social practices in ancient societies. Many of you who've been affected by mold, there's a spiritual component of this. It really gets you to your core. It tests your spirit. Many of you might not be religious or be a Christian or so forth, but I think you get what I'm saying here. The biblical account of mold inspection and remediation serves as a testament to the enduring importance of maintaining clean, healthy living spaces that are mold-free for the well-being of ourselves our families, and our communities. Thank you for listening to the Mold Podcast. Again, I'm Moe the Mold Inspector, owner of Mold Safe Solutions and a certified mold inspector serving all of Southern California. If you need help with any type of mold situation, if you live in San Diego, Riverside, Orange County, San Bernardino, I'd be happy to help you. Please give me a call at 760-818-6830. Again, that number is 760-818-6830. Or you could text me anytime, Moe, M-O-E, at moldsafesolutions.com. Thank you for listening and have a great day.